There's nothing like the 3 o'clock hour, so thank you all for being here with us and hanging in. We're going to get started with live audience participation. So we've got a poll for you, so if you can pull out your phones. Careful, do it quick before they get banned. Here's the question we want you to think about. Think about a young person in your life who's a few years away from their first real job, and what worries you most about their path into the workforce? Are you worried that they won't have opportunities to gain relevant work experience? Are you worried that the job they're preparing for won't exist? Do you think their education isn't building the skills that employers are going to want? You know, maybe they don't have the network that they're going to need to get those jobs. So let us know what you're thinking. And while the audience is doing that, I'm curious what you all think. Maybe we'll start with a quick round of, when you think about young people, you know, what do you worry about? Who wants to start? Michael?
Well, in the middle? I just knew I wasn't going first. Well, first, good to see you all here at 3 o'clock. I've been up and down the state at UC, CSU, and community college campuses. And the thing that I'm most worried about is that we have these brilliant, talented, amazing young people with the same talent and intellect and drive that we all had, who don't yet have the civil society, the guardrails, the governing environment for them to be able to thrive and prosper. It feels like we're 20 years or at least 10 years behind where we need to be in terms of the governance conversation, in terms of the conversation of civil society around what the future work looks like. So I'm worried that they know, they see the problem, they're experiencing the problem even now applying for jobs. And not we or not you all, you guys are here, but we as a body politic are still kind of asleep at the wheel.
That's awesome. Michael, let's see what the audience is starting to say about this. What are you all thinking? Oh, it's pretty split. So we've got 4 challenging situations, although, you know, I think you're speaking to are they building the skills that we'll actually need? And I think well, I'm glad you all are here, because I think you're going to speak to that today and help us with that. And so I want us to get into it. As we do, there will be an opportunity for you all to share questions for the panel. We're going to collect those electronically as well while we go through this dialogue. So have your phone out, send those in. We'll be curating those, and we'll do a little bit of a conversation here, but as we go, if stuff comes up, please share it with us, all right? I just wanted to start, set a teeny bit of context, and then we'll dive in with these amazing folks who've joined us today. So we started the day with a vision for what comes next in K-12, a very inspiring, music-filled vision for that. I've spent my day, I hope you have as well, sort of wrapping my head around the perspectives and the players and what's going on and the proof points and the bright spots and what's out there. We just watched this video of Believe. I feel so honored to be able to work with the Believe schools, and Kim, who's here with us, and John, and the work that they do is incredibly inspiring, and those young people. And this room is filled with people like Kim and John and the Believe team. And we want to, I think, in this moment, make sure we're building backward from where we want our young people to land. And as we heard, that's into a life of their choosing, a life that is financially sustainable for them, that provides economic mobility. And so this afternoon, we're going to sort of do that thing we do in education and backward map. And so we're going to visit, the future for our young people and try to figure out what is going to be needed so we know what we should be building. And, one of my reflections as a K-12 leader for a very long time is that for far too long, I worked on building schools that were focused on getting everyone into college. And when that wasn't panning out exactly as we thought and hoped, we pivoted to college persistence. And what I'm pretty clear about and what we're going to talk about today is that's just no longer enough. And I fear we're in a moment where some people are like, well, maybe if we just get them into the right major, then that will solve the problem. And I really know that's no longer enough. And so I'm going to look to the three of you to help us understand why that's no longer enough and what we're facing. And we're going to start with you, Matt. You spend a lot of time in data. And I kind of want you to give us a reality check. What is the data telling us about what we need to be building for our young people?
Fantastic. You know, I know that the title of this discussion is Who Gets on the Ladder in the Age of AI? And I want to parse that out into to both clauses or whatever that is. I should have go back to English class, right? Who gets on the ladder in the age of AI? And before we can talk about in the age of AI, I think we actually need to understand who is getting on the ladder today and how that works or doesn't. And so I'm going to take you into the data. So we'll pull some of that up right now.
And I'm just going to say quickly, you're about to see a lot of data on slides. We'll make these available to you afterwards if you want to study them. Focus on what Matt is saying, I think.
The translation of that is, I'm a data nerd. I'm not very interesting, but my data
No, you are. Not true.
But let's start here with this, with what you're seeing here. This comes from from study that we've done of the careers of 10 million students who went straight from high school to work. There's actually a bunch of good news here, right? Which is that there's exactly to your point. We, for a lot of years, assumed that you have to go to college in order to be able to have a good career. The reality is that the top 20% of students who go straight to work after high school out-earn the average college graduate, right? So it is possible to have a very good career coming straight out of high school. The other good news here is we know what that looks like. There are very predictable patterns of who gets a good job. And unfortunately, and here's where the bad news comes in, there is precisely no one in most schools who is guiding students as to which path is which. There are sets of starting jobs that make you 4 times more likely to be a top earner by the time you're 40. And there are sets of starting jobs that make you 4 times as likely to be in poverty by the time you're 40. And they often pay the same. We have, to the extent we have guidance in our schools, it's oriented toward getting students into college. What does that look like if we actually start to have a set of standards for career coaching? And this is important not only because this is how people launch, but because the job you launch into is really about what job that helps you do next. And so it's about developing the sets of skills and giving the infrastructure that helps people move on. So that's the part about how people are getting on today. But I want to go into the age of AI. I know it's very much on people's minds. A lot of the focus right now is about is this kind of apocalyptic and hyperbolized discourse around how the jobs are all going to go away. What we know both from what we're already seeing in the evidence and what we see from having studied a lot of past tech revolutions is they don't actually change whether, for the most part, whether you work, but they do change how you work. And we're seeing that already. Across an array of jobs, just over the last 3.5 years, the skills you need to do them have changed. That's not just in tech, what you're seeing in, if you could actually read this, I realize it's like optometrist says, now read line 17. But what you would see here is that here's a marketing job, right? It's changed a lot. The other set of changes that we're seeing, though, and this people are starting to wake up and recognize, is that employers in the age of AI increasingly are saying, we don't want people at the entry level. And they're still hiring. This is different from a typical slow job market. The employers are still hiring, they're just not hiring our graduates. And so increasingly what that says is that we're going to need to make sure that our students are prepared to start their careers, not at the beginning, but in the middle. And there's going to be sets of skills that make them more efficient, more effective at the same time. It's kind of a new set of power skills for the 21st century. We need to make sure that we know what those are. One of the ways we've been trying to approach that, we've been working together with our friends at AIEDU, and I know they're here today as well, to really actually try to translate what's AI doing to jobs and to the skills, because AI is a technology for work, and how does that translate across to the learning objectives in our curricula. There's good news here, right? We mapped the curricula of 21 states and 140 learning objectives. There's not a single thing that we're teaching in schools right now that we said, gee, AI just replaces it. But what it does do, that whole interplay of automation and augmentation of what does AI just not, kind of mean that you don't need to do anymore? What are the things that you do better with AI? That interplay means that the whole dynamics around how we prioritize, how we teach, change in very meaningful ways. It also means that the cognitive demands on students are actually going up, not down, right? In order to be able to do things well in the age of AI, you actually need to be able to do them with greater levels of proficiency, right? The AI does the simple stuff really well, and so that says that, again, we're going to need to figure out how to raise the bar, even as we struggle today already to make effective connections between school and work. I want to talk about, just very briefly, what this means when we talk about preparing students for the age of AI and what AI skills are. Because I think there's this mental model that most of us have, which is that AI skills are about how to use AI. In the same way that I think in the beginning of, we're just probably, most of us are of an age where remember when computers in the classroom was new, and the whole rationale was
Not
starting
me.
to rethink.
I started with
Okay.
They were fully present when he got there.
My daughter recently told me that I'm learning a new language that she knows, and she's like, Papa, you sound like a caveman. So I'm like, my aspiration is to join the Mesolithic era. Like, never going to be good. But back in the caveman era, right? We remember when computers in the classroom were a new thing. It was like, oh, they need to know how to use a computer.
Or they need to learn keyboarding. That's like literally.
I remember
what
that. Yeah,
I
we had
went to
typing.
Mrs. Kirsch. I went to Mrs. Kirsch's typing school with a room full of Smith Coronas. Okay,
Yeah.
so in any case, we think that's what AI fluency is, right? And the reality is, yes, there's some knowledge of AI. There's some knowledge even more than that of when to use it, when not to use it, how to be responsible. But the bigger things in AI fluency are about going deeper. We were talking about how it increases the cognitive demands. And so it means that the things we're already learning, we need to learn how to do deeper and broader at the same time, right? All the things that we're hearing AI is going to replace, you don't need to know how to do it anymore, coding, graphic design, whatever, totally nonsense, right? Because what we know is that past tech revolution, think about Excel. Microsoft Excel automated ledger accounting, but it really made each of us a data analyst. And so AI, yes, Claude is great at coding. Claude is going to mean that we each are coding, right? So we are both going to need to prepare students to go broad and deep. Last thing I'll just say in terms of what we're seeing is this. If we're trying to train students to start their careers in the middle, we need to make sure that they have mechanisms to gain experience and to credential experience. And if we were to wave our hands, wave our magic wand and say every student's going to have a work-based learning experience, put aside the logistical difficulties of that, what it's going to mean is we're going to actually have to start to build muscle about how we engage with employers, how we build pipelines. And at the same time, if we're going to say that every student deserves to be able to have access to career and technical education training, we need to actually make sure that students are earning CTE credentials that work. Right now, only 18% of the CTE credentials that students earn are actually in demand by employers for good jobs.
Say that one more time, please.
18% of CTE credentials, your Perkins Act dollars at work, are actually in demand by employers.
So we can think that we're doing a great job. We're going out, we're getting our kids these credentials, and literally a fifth of them aren't going to mean anything.
There were 7,000 students last year who earned the National Beef Council's Safe Beef Handling certification in CTE programs.
Please tell me that's not how you're going to end this little moment right now.
Well, I'm just handing it to these people to say how we do this better.
Okay.
Wait, Is that in demand or not, I guess?
Not for a good job.
Not for a good job. Not for a good job. Allison, okay, your charge now is sort of picking up the beef and moving us forward. And you're doing a lot of talking and a lot of writing now that's very provocative, and so I'm excited for you to be here. And you're very provocative on this experience question. But before we get there, one of the things you're trying to help us do is not just like freak out like we don't know what's coming. There is some stuff we can know, and so take us there.
Yeah, so I feel like I've sort of been on tour with Matt for the last year, and if he's the data guy, I'm the nerdy framework gal. And so I thought I would do 3 things rather quickly. The first is break down why is the future of AI-driven work so hard to predict? Why do you have headlines all over the place right now? Because I think it's actually important for this room to start to develop like some fluency around how do you make sense of the data and predictions that are going to be thrown at you like over and over and over again. The second is, despite that ambiguity in the range of predictions, what is it we do have reasonable confidence around? And then third is, what might we start doing about it? And we won't have quite as much time for that, but I'll try to hit the highlights as quickly as possible. So the first is, why is the future of work so hard to predict? And here, my nerdy framework, I call it AI's 3-body problem. So for my physics and sci-fi nerds in the room, if you've read or watched the 3-body problem, you'll sort of understand the reference. The idea in physics is when you have 2 gravitational bodies rotating each other, you can predict their path. But when you add a third, it becomes impossible to predict until the moment before they make their next move. It's quite literally chaotic. And I think that's what you have going on right now in AI, because you have 3 distinct vectors of change. The first is, how powerful will the AI models get how fast? It's a capability question. And reasonable experts disagree wildly. Some people think there's superintelligence quite literally right around the corner, and others think the current structure of LLMs will not get us much past where we are today. The second vector of prediction is, how fast will those capabilities diffuse into our systems of work? How quickly will they automate and augment work? And that is actually not a technological problem. That is a problem of budgets and procurement and culture and policy and institutional inertia and change management and. And there's some places in the economy that will happen incredibly fast, and other places in the economy that will do it very poorly and very slowly for a very long time. It's a very hard thing to predict. And one of the things I think about here when I visit friends and family in New Jersey is we still have gas attendants pumping gas. Not because you need them to, but because we have decided to keep those jobs. And I think that's an important thing to sort of come back to when we talk about the diffusion piece of this. And the third, and this is actually really heated up just in the past week, a bunch of people have been weighing in on this, is what net new jobs might be created? What new inventions might we produce in the workforce as a result of this technology? Every wave of past technology has created new jobs and it's destroyed. Almost all jobs that have been created since 1940 did not exist before 1940. And so we continue on that trajectory. We continue to invent the app builders and the SEO specialists and the digital marketers of the internet, but for the AI era, sort of jobs that we don't even know how to give words to? Or will AI actually just take every net new task and job that we're able to imagine or predict? We actually do not know. So we have these 3 vectors that are interacting with one another in a pretty chaotic way. And so just one of the things I find useful as you interact with data and headlines on this topic, you should be thinking about which vector are they talking about, just so you have a sort of a framework to start making sense of the future. So despite that ambiguity, what is it we do know? And here I have another little framework. I like to sort of bucket them in 3 things, sort of almost independent of the scenarios that you look at. What do we have confidence around? The first is that AI is very good at rules-based routine work. And this is why it's such a threat to the entry-level knowledge economy worker. Rules-based routine work. Then the inverse is also true. The thing that will continue to be quite important for workers at all stages of their career, but definitely early on, is the ability to do the inverse, non-rules-based, non-routine work, which I think is quite important, because most schooling, not just at the K-12, but also the post-secondary level, is actually mostly organized around teaching rules-based routine work. So that's a big provocation for us to start to think about. The second is applied jobs. jobs that require skill of body and of mind, and are ideally also relational in nature. Healthcare, sort of very big center of the bullseye here. Those are very likely at the entry level going to be far more durable over the next 15 plus years than certainly entry level work that is more digitally mediated. And yet we've almost systematically sort of inhibited our ability at every level of our education system to prepare people for these applied and relational jobs. And then the third category, and this one's a little bit less intuitive, is around ownership. One of the amazing things about AI is the ways in which it allows people who own small businesses, who start companies, who own real estate, who own assets, to actually accrue a lot more economic value and economic agency because they can get so much efficiency out of AI. 50% of the private workforce runs or works in a small business. And we almost never think about ownership and entrepreneurship as a very viable, very meaningful, very high economic agency pathway for young people to pursue. So you have these three buckets of work. You have non-routine, non-rules-based work, you have applied work, and you have ownership. And those are three things that I have a lot of conviction on, independent of the scenarios around where we land, that I think they can start actually orienting us around what most matters. And that sort of gets to the final piece, which I'll go through as fast as possible, which is like, okay, well, what might that mean? And I'd say there's sort of three big provocations that we've been thinking a lot about. The first is, what does it look like for motivation and agency to be the core purpose of school? Especially in a world where most work is non-rules-based, non-routine. You have to define your own problems, marshal resources to solve them, work through ambiguity. That is the work of the future, because AI can do everything else. That requires agency, that requires motivation, that requires what Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop talk about in their book, The Disengaged Teen, the explore mode, high agency and high engagement. So that, I think, becomes incredibly important. I think it's never been a better time to be a motivated learner, and it's never been a riskier time to not be one. The second is experience. And I don't just mean work-based learning, community-based learning, simulations, class projects, entrepreneurship, and things embedded within employers. I believe 50% of formal learning should be experience-based.
Say that one more.
I believe that 50% of formal learning should be experience-based. Mm-hmm. I love that that's getting an applause. Usually people look at me like I'm crazy. And then the last thing is around what we choose to measure matters. And you all know this better than anyone else because you feel the implications of assessment and measurement on what you do every day. But for the first time, we actually have new modalities in the form of AI to actually measure the durable skills, the human skills, the power skills we've long talked about as important, never had a way of reliable, valid way of measuring them at scale. We do now. And those skills have never been more important than they've been before. So I really think we also need to rethink the measures that matter, how we instrument measuring them, and how that starts incentivizing sort of an ecosystem of learning and work that's more centered on creating high agency, high motivated learners.
Awesome. I like that your frameworks are not 2x2s, they're just threes.
Threes.
Kind of refreshing.
Ideally pulling on physics concepts.
Michael,
Number.
we can easily get like up here in AI and the future, and in our conversation, you took us back to, folks, we've got some real problems and some real root causes to those problems. And if we don't think about and work on those root causes, we might just be like layering stuff on top of them that makes it worse. So ground us.
Oh, happy to. Well, wow, right? I felt like I was in those classes I skipped at Stanford where they had all the physics and charts and stuff. So thank you all for those learnings. I'm going to look at these slides myself. I'm actually really excited. No, I think the sort of takeaway from what I've heard and in line with our conversation is that as we talk about an on-ramp or a ladder with AI, we probably should talk about the floor first and the foundation. The fact that poverty is still so pervasive. It's going to make it hard and then if the AI is going to require higher mental cognition, it's going to be hard for kids who are hungry. kids with high ACEs scores. A lot of kids in our country, right? And that's something we could solve today before the rapid transformation that will come with AI. When we think about the ways in which sort of teaching has to change, and sort of how do we teach and what do we teach? We're still arguing and debating about how to create effective teachers, or doing what it takes to create effective teachers. Secondarily, figuring out how to make sure every school has an effective teacher in every classroom. And then to layer on top of that, how do we make sure teachers are equipped with the skills to teach students how to use and leverage AI in all the ways that were mentioned? So I think my biggest fear, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, is that we have a technology that has great potential to have massive benefits, to unlock new avenues of human creativity and ingenuity, to create a future we can't even articulate yet. But as we think of sort of the technological transformations of the past, I think the challenge before us in this moment is to figure out how do you make sure those at the bottom and at the middle are able to rise with this new technology and they're not stuck there. How do we make sure that it's not just folks who are doing well now who are going to be doing even better with this technology? How do you make sure it's not the kids whose parents are doing well now won't just be the adults who are going to do better in the future, but that we have a tool or a technology that could be a powerful democratizing force, could be a powerful force for entrepreneurship and ownership, but that cannot happen and will not happen if we don't get the fundamentals correct now. We can't figure out a way to make sure that everyone has access to the basics that folks need, that we know folks need to self-actualize, to do all the things we need them to do, to be creative, to have high agency, high motivation, simple things that you all have, like shelter, safety, reasonable safety, food, and things of that sort. So I truly think in this moment what's exciting is that the technology, there's so many unknowns. But I can say with certainty, the problems we have today will only get worse with this technology if we don't get serious about not just daydreaming about the technological future, but dealing with the dystopian present and figuring out how do we put to work what we know works. Like, how do you make sure we put what we know works so that we have a strong foundation upon which we can build on? But my biggest fear is that the rate of technological innovation is going to continue to rapidly outpace the rate in which our civil society evolves in terms of understanding that there's no real hierarchy on human value, that everyone has inherent dignity and worth irregardless of what they produce or what they do, and that everyone deserves not the same outcome, but we need to get really serious about this thing called opportunity. We have to get really serious about making sure that we're not setting up some kids, some communities for failures by positing that everything they see, the outcomes they see, are just a result of their own failures, or their inability to do something, or their inability to learn, or their inability to work hard, because we also know that's not true. So that was 6 minutes, but all I need to say was one thing, is that we don't fix the fundamentals today, that we won't, most people won't reap the benefits of what could be great tomorrow. And the real challenge, I think, for us, again, isn't just how do we harness this technology, but it's how do we get the transition right this time for everyone? How do you make sure everyone has a shot, everyone has a chance, everyone benefits, and that some of the inequities and inequalities don't exacerbate, don't get worse, but actually get better this time for the first time when there's a big technological innovation or transformation.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna ask a couple more questions, but then I want you to pose some questions. So make sure you're using that app and you're sending your questions in for these folks. I want you to be very, if people who know me know I'm very blunt and very honest, and I'm gonna ask the three of you to be that right now, which is, what do you think we're misunderstanding, or what are the myths in K-12 that you see that are holding us back, that are preventing us from doing what we need to do to deal with these root cause issues and to prepare our young people for the future you're laying out?
I'll go first, and I'll be brief. I think in this room and outside this room, what is missing oftentimes is that schools are mirrors or reflections of everything outside the school. Hopes, aspirations, but also what's happening today. And there's no quick and easy fix. Like even if we fixed every school and every school had all the things we know schools need, we would see some better outcomes for sure, but we still won't be where we need to be unless we fix everything that's happening outside of the school. So that any school reform, any new school has to be steered in how do we create a new society? How do we create all the things outside of school so schools can just do their job, which is to educate young people and give them the tools to be critical thinkers and to question the world and to leverage technology to build new tools. So absolutely, I think the thing that in the body politic writ large is this idea that schools are reflections or mirrors. They're not the problem. And if we could solve everything in the school, but if we don't solve everything or work to solve everything outside the school in tandem, we'll be frustrated with our efforts.
So I think your provocation to us, though, is that we can't just think we can, bring all the kids inside, close the door, and we're going to magically be able to change the world for them, that we actually interact with and engage with the community at large.
Absolutely, you could probably change the world for a couple of them. Like, I'm one of those kids. Like, it works, like, in the micro level, but in terms of scale, absolutely not.
Yeah. Allison, myths, misunderstandings, what are you seeing?
Yeah, and it's this myth or misunderstanding I don't think is just in K-12. I spent a few days last week with the trustees of one of the largest universities in the country that serves a lot of low opportunity working adults. And this was a big point of the conversation there as well, which is I think we had this shorthand of thinking about what AI means for the future of work. That becomes then this AI literacy rubric that then becomes using AI like a tool. And Matt hit on this some in his overview as well. And I think the reason why it's the wrong mental model, and the reason why this conversation matters now, even as early as the K-12 level, is because actually the way AI is changing work is it's making it so that everybody has to be a problem solver for day one. Everybody has to be able to manage their ambiguity, define the problem, marshal resources to solve that problem. All of the things that we've long talked about is incredibly important in education: critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, persuasion, judgment, reasoning, taste, intuition. These are now important from day one. Because think about the job of an entry-level employee. If the rules-based routine work can be done by AI and you're doing non-rules-based, non-routine work, what you're doing from day one is you're actually a manager. It's just instead of managing employees on year 5, you're managing AI employees on day 1. And that's functionally what we've come to call the experience gap. And I believe the experience gap will become to be a much bigger deal than the skills gap over time. Because the skills gap you can functionally close in a classroom setting through teaching those skills over and over and over again. The experience gap you have to close through experiences, which is where my provocation of 50% of formal learning should be experience-based comes from. It's also pedagogically sound, but it's also useful with the experience gap. And so I think this is a myth and misunderstanding that becomes an AI literacy conversation that treats AI like a tool. And the reason why I'm here in a K-12 community when historically I've sat in workforce and higher ed communities is because of what we need is young people, day one on the job, to be able to do work that we used to only require by year 5. That has to start much, much, much earlier, because those skills and capabilities take many, many years and like many different kinds of interdisciplinary domains and experiences in order to practice and to cultivate.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Matt?
Two myths I want to speak to just briefly. The first is this: when it comes to the transition from school to career, we've sort of set up a set of binaries. We have college or career. We have an academic education or a career education. And it's not an either or. As we think about the skills that students need to succeed, whether in college right away, whether college over time, whether they're going straight to the workforce, a lot of them are the same skills. We also know, to Allison's point before, that in many cases throughout throughout the spectrum of what students are learning in the classroom, there's a whole bunch of things that we're trying to teach extrinsically right now that need to be taught intrinsically in project-based learning and career-connected learning and work-based learning. And this says that this notion of these irreversible choices, chutes that students go down, is pedagogically wrong, and it's wrong in terms of what outcomes we produce through that. The second is this, and you touched on this at the start, as you described your experience as an educator. We have tended to structure our vision around getting kids to graduate, getting kids to go to college. Our work as educators doesn't stop when students graduate. The measure of our success is over a much longer longitude, but beyond that, the level of support that students need continues well after they've left high school, well after they've left college. And in a world where work is changing so much, the notion that you can pick up in your first 2 decades of life everything you need to know for the next 5 is kind of risible.
This is perfect. So we've got a question that's come in, and I think the 4 of us can tackle this. I've included myself now because I have some feelings. The question is, where does the burden, it literally says burden, for increasing experience-based learning lie? On schools or industry or someone else, such as the government? I got to start with the burden word. So I think we've just literally got to shift our mindset. It can't be viewed as a burden. Like, let's think about this. Like, experiential learning is awesome, right? It's amazing. It's like when you ask people about their most profound learning experience, it's most often experiential learning. So let's just shift that mindset. And then you all, where does the opportunity, the privilege of bringing experience-based learning lie? And how do you see that sort of coming into being? Because most of our K-12 system is not experiential right now.
So one of the things which I'll throw out there is this, because I very much agree that this can be something that truly is a benefit to all parties, but I think we have to acknowledge that it's not right now for employers.
Yeah.
And so we want employers, we depend on employers to create more work-based learning experiences for students. But let's face it, and for those of us who have had interns, you kind of say, gee, you know, this is work. And the question is, how do we make this more valuable for, not only for the students, but how do we make this valuable for employers? And again, not only valuable because it's a recruiting path or whatever, but how do we make sure that we're pairing the training that students are acquiring in the same way you saw in the video with Believe, right? The students are learning in the classroom how to undertake things that are work relevant. That not only means that they can exercise it, but it also means that employers are going to want more of this.
Yeah. Well, and Believe is such a perfect example of that because I've spent time with their community partner, BJC, and they're very clear about the value proposition for their hospitals and as employers, and it is a mutually beneficial experience, but it's key. Where does the responsibility lie? I mean, Michael, you're in the, well, you've been in the government, you might be in the government again, you know, like what role does the government play here?
Yeah, I forgot to mention I'm running for lieutenant governor of California. And germane to this conversation because the lieutenant governor sits on the UC, CSU, and community college boards, and so much of the work will be consulting with experts like you in figuring out how do we prepare California higher ed students for the future work. So I think at its best, government could be a convener, to your point of it not being a burden. But it's presenting as an opportunity like, hey, this is a priority for us. How do we bring together partners in industry and partners in schools? And you're not going to start with everyone. You got to start small. You got to start with a couple.
Yeah.
Coalition of the willing. So ideally, government would be a convener and bring in a couple motivated K-12 districts or K-12 schools, a couple community colleges as well, a couple industry partners. Because the thing is, the conversation we're having here, industry is having in some way. Like folks are having the conversation. And I think government at its best is a person that brings all the parties together and say, okay, now what can we do? It doesn't necessarily have to start with like legislation or a rule, but I think it does start with like a process and an opportunity. And then to be a cheerleader and say, hey, good job. You guys are doing good. I like this. This is a good thing. State, we should model that. So to the point of the question, government's a convener for sure, and then it's also catalytic and sort of bringing the right people together, providing some incentives, bringing some attention, and just providing some leadership to get the people who can actually do the job the courage, the confidence, and the energy to do it.
Allison, what do you think?
So I actually have like built my career on being like the education to work gal, and the work-based learning, internships, everything. What are new models to align incentives or reduce the friction for more of those opportunities to be more prolific for post-secondary students in particular? And then now we've started to turn a lot more of our lens towards high school and middle school learners. And I think that is a very big category. The one thing I'd say there, before I'm going to say something completely different, is that is a category that's undergoing pretty significant disruption. You have this like supply-demand problem with entry-level roles increasingly for a lot of knowledge economy jobs where they're just not hiring as much, and so employers' incentives to come to the table in partnerships are going down, not up, except for in industries with applied jobs. And that's why applied jobs that are ideally also relational is one of my 3 buckets: healthcare, skilled trades, Main Street entrepreneurship. This is a place where they have extraordinary entry-level talent gaps, and employers are highly incentivized to come to the table and put forward a lot of assets, a lot of resources, a lot of time, because it's existential for them. So if you're going to think about sort of models to reduce friction and line incentives to work more with employers, you should only be spending your time with employers in categories who have entry-level talent shortages today. Otherwise, you'll completely waste your time. The other thing I'll say, and we sort of did this whole report on like what would need to be true for 50% of formal learning to be experience-based, and my big worry of putting that report into the world is that people would nod and clap and it would like become true, but then those experiences would be really low quality and like we're like almost worse off than before. Because all experiences are not created equal. You have to say like, why does experience matter in this conversation? And I would say sort of I'm the nerdy framework of 3, and so here's another one. I actually didn't even think I'd do this, but here goes. There's 3 things that experiences gets you. It gets you skills, gets you social capital, and it gets you occupational identity. It teaches you how to do things. It gives you relationships that create support and value and make introductions for you over time. And occupational identity, which is what you believe you can be and what you want to be. And experiences, good experiences, should do one or more of those jobs, and collectively a set of experiences that a young person has should check all those boxes. And then the overlay on top of that is they should be hard. They should be uncomfortable. They should be challenging. As educators, we know that zone of proximal development is where learning happens. And in a world, again, where most work, the most future of work, is non-routine, non-rules-based, that's by definition hard and challenging and uncomfortable. You don't know the answer. You have to learn how to figure it out. And that is a muscle and a set of mindsets that you have to build. And so unless these experiences do those things, they kind of don't matter. And I say that in the context of my opening lines around employers is because I actually think it's going to be far easier to build those kind of experiences in our schools, in community-based settings, in entrepreneurial projects. And I think that we know how to do a lot of that. What we get really intimidated by is sort of the interoperability with the local employer ecosystem, which is important, but definitely not the whole piece of the puzzle here.
Excellent. You all have started going this direction, but I just want to give us, as we sort of come to the close, this opportunity to say the quiet part out loud. So you're in a lot of conversations, probably with a lot of people that many of us are not in conversations with. And I know that there, are whispers and worries, and so what is it that we don't know that that folks in our world aren't saying maybe about us or about our work or what we should be doing or wishing we were doing. And we can handle it.
When you say we,
I'm talking the K-12 people.
I'll say this. Allison and I both talked before about what it means for students to prepare themselves for the world of AI, and and the fact that it's not just learning how to use AI, right? We'll all figure that out, but it's a broader set of skills. We all can see how that's going to change, but here's what I think we're not saying, and we need to. We sort of treat this like it's going to be cut and paste. Yeah. That there's a new set of skills, okay, we just can kind of glam that into the curriculum. We need to do more project-based learning, and we'll just make sure that that changes in the curriculum. This is not something we can just solve through curriculum. This is going to need to be solved through teachers. And this needs to, and the question we have to ask ourselves, and I think we're not talking enough about, is, are teachers ready? Are we giving them the resources that they need? Are we making sure that they're prepared? What would it take to make sure that they are?
Yeah.
and just to add to that, to the framing of your question, I'm fascinated by how often there's conversations going on about the future of certain industries that affect all of us without people who work and live in those industries being in the room. So my challenge for you all would be, and no disrespect to the very smart people who build technology, some of them I happen to know, but I don't think they should be in charge of what the future of education looks like. I would much rather it be driven by practitioners and leaders who are educated and have years of experiential learning in terms of what works and what doesn't. So what I would say is my challenge for you is that there's so much on your plate, but if you wait for the answer to be given to you, if you wait for the AI industry to tell you what to do, if you even wait for government to tell you what to do, you'll be waiting, and you'll be waiting for a far less, a worse product than if you now, with the knowledge you have, with the information you have, with the students you have, with the ecosystem you have, begin to model what the answer will be. Because again, if it's a passive process, we're going to be worse off. But if it's actually driven and led and developed by people who may not have developed the technology, but have track records of developing young people and minds and careers and trajectories, then we're in a much better position. So please do iterate, launch, try, fail, try again. Because the answer is not going to come from industry, or the answer that comes from industry won't be one, in my opinion, that would be in the best interest of all of our kids.
And one of the things I appreciate about you, Michael, is that you walk that talk, you try things, and we haven't had time to get into it today.
I'm sorry, you put that in the notes too,
You're a
and I
model.
didn't, I'm sorry.
Well,
Forgive me.
Lots of people ignore me, so don't worry about it. What do you think, Allison?
Yeah, I'll come back to something that I mentioned very briefly, which is this idea of explore mode, which is language from the disengaged teen. And this 2x2 I find really helpful because it has engagement on one axis and agency on the other. How engaged are you and how high agency are you? And I think a lot of our models of education at all levels, including post-secondary, they think about success as being low agency, high engagement, which is what they call achiever mode. So we tell you to do something and you do it excellently, again and again and again and again for all of your formal educational experience, and that is success. And then we look at explore mode, it's high agency, high engagement. It's you are defining the problem. You are marshaling resources to solve it. And 4% wow. of young people spend any time in explore mode during their formal education. And if all future jobs require people to be in explore mode from day one, wow. the implication of that is pretty significant. And it means it's not about incremental change. It is actually about like a fundamental reimagining of the purpose of school and schooling, is to help more people spend more time in a supported way in that explorer mode. And I'll say universities and colleges are wrestling with exactly the same thing, the exactly same set of prompts. So you're in good company.
And that was a good place for us to end. Will you join me in thanking these folks for spending time with us? Yeah. I appreciate you. Awesome.